for what they like, don't they?
Okay,
So
we're going live. A very warm welcome to a live edition, albeit a delayed kickoff, 30 minutes late. Nothing to do with the big crowd coming in, more to do with the BBC football guru Simon Stone having to do his day job and focus on the FA Cup. I was going to say just the fourth round draw, but quite bizarrely, the fourth and fifth round draws, Simon. I have to say, FA Trophy's about our limit at the moment these days. But thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, you're a top man, aren't you? Six figure on Twitter. One of the few journalists who Sir Alex Ferguson would talk to on a regular basis. So you're up there at the top of the tree. And we've been having a poll today of supporters chatting with fans. COVID is clearly gripping quite severely now and is likely to get significantly worse. So we're discussing tonight specific reference to the National League, the continuation of the league, and if it has to come to a stop. Clearly, there are more challenges with the National League than, say, the Premier League or the Football League. With your finger on the pulse, how bad is it? How close do you think we are to the stopping of football in this country at the moment?
Well, if we're talking football, I think we're not far away at all, because I think the level below the National League will be null and voided in reasonably short order. I don't see any way that can go ahead, and I think that would be for the betterment of those clubs, because I think ultimately what they've got to do is in maybe March, probably April, May, got to devise some kind of way of playing football that will allow them to generate income. And I think the only way of doing that is to play local matches. There's no prospect of completing seasons as they stand. So if we're talking about stopping football, I think that will happen fairly quickly. I think at the top end, the Premier League, clearly, and you can see evidence of this at the moment, the Premier League are doing everything that they can to continue with the season, and that will carry on for as long as they can carry on. I think then underneath that you have a situation where the Championship has to carry on, because they can't be in a situation where the Premier League carries on playing and they don't, which is exactly the situation we were in March. And then below that, I think it gets more complicated. So League One and League Two, and then clearly the National League. The issue that the National League have got, which as far as I'm aware, is unresolved to the extent of knowing A, where the money's coming from, B, what form it's in, and C, who's getting it, is where the finance is going to come from to pay for the National League and National League North and National League South continue, because I think everyone really is agreed that had there not been a promise of central funding to start the season, then it wouldn't have started. And now people talk about loans, and obviously the distribution model was heavily criticised. And all these things are unresolved. And until they are resolved, then there's got to be a major doubt over clubs' willingness to play. If it does get resolved, there is an onus on them to play, because they have agreed the terms upon which they will play as a kind of elite, in inverted commas, sport. So I think the crux of it is getting some resolution over finance, and that is almost the nub of every discussion you ever have in football. But certainly at National League level, that's where I see the major conversations and decisions being made.
Clearly, the root or benefit of all evils ultimately turns out to be money. And we'll pick up, if we may, the finance allocation in a moment, because that's clearly been a bit of a dog's dinner for the National League. It's the chief executive has left. There's all sorts of problems with the independent inquiry with David Bernstein who headed that, and how that report has been received by the National League executive at the moment. Just looking at things logistically, Notts have played 14 games. They've got to play 44. So that's another 30 games to go. And there are some teams that have played less. So we're already at a point in middle of January where 30 fixtures have to be played. That's assuming no postponements by the end of April, but clearly they can extend the season if it's needed to. COVID, we're in the grip of COVID. It's getting worse, not better. We asked fans today, it's a small poll, admittedly, a couple of hundred, 50, I'll just get the exact figures. So to carry on as normal, 58% of Notts fans said the National League should carry on as normal. 21%, we gave them the option of suspending for a month. And the same figure, 21%, season null and void. So you're looking at one in five saying, scrap it right now, that's it, bin it. 1 in 5 saying suspend it for a month, see what happens with COVID. And nearly 2/3 are saying, let's try and get through it. You mix a lot with football. I mean, do you think physically the way COVID is going that you could get the games in, just park the finance for a minute? Because if Manchester City and those sorts of clubs are struggling, what chance of Kings Lynn and all the rest of it got? Notts have played one game in something like 3.5 weeks and had 3 matches postponed out the last 4, to put it into context. And I know you're an Altrincham man who've had their problems as well.
I think you have to take it in the round. So the season didn't start until October, did it? So
Nope.
we're six weeks behind there. So how many games are you looking at there? So you're probably looking at 9 fewer games, maybe, than you would normally have played by that time, maybe more.
Yeah.
I think you also have to look at when last season finished. So if the playoffs continued until June, which clearly they had to have done, I don't have the exact dates, but football didn't start until June. And I remember Altrincham obviously got promoted through the playoffs. So if there was an agreement amongst the clubs who participated in those playoffs to continue the season until June, then I would have thought there's a reasonable assumption that you could, even if it wouldn't be entirely in the best interests of everybody financially in terms of paying players, I would have thought there's a reasonable assumption that you would pay players until June in order to complete the season, especially, and this is, I mean, we are in the lap of the gods, aren't we, here? Absolutely. I think clearly the idea of supporters in grounds by February half term is non-existent. I think realistically, the idea of fans in grounds by the end of March seems a stretch. But then beyond that, when the weather gets better, when vaccines, who knows how many vaccines will be distributed, we kind of got the feeling that in April, May, June, there will be the option of getting fans in grounds. And if you could play 3 months of the season, bearing in mind, certainly in the National League, most clubs operate with full-time squads, most do, then I would have thought it's not beyond the realms of possibility that you could complete a season on that basis. Now, clearly, you are crossing your fingers that what I would regard as a best case scenario comes to pass. But at the moment, I think the National League, its clubs, like the EFL, like non-league below your level, the Trident Leagues and Northwest Counties where I live, like the Premier League, and like I've been talking about the FA Cup today and how the Premier League possibly having to postpone a game in order to get this Shrewsbury Southampton game played. And everybody's almost managing from not week to week even, it's half week to half week. And I just think at the moment, unless somebody turns round and says to the National League, stop, then the National League might as well carry on, because even if you have a full fixture list and only 3 games get played, well, it's 3 more games than you had before you had the weekend. And I do think that, and this is where the big issue comes in, and these are the kind of conversations that I'm hearing about and my colleagues are talking about. There is going to be increased scrutiny on how football behaves itself during this period. So most people, I assume, on social media will have seen the celebrations at Chorley on Saturday, and it's completely understandable how that happened. But that went against every social distancing guideline that is in operation at the moment. And so clubs have to bear this in mind. So if Notts or any of their clubs are, having car sharing arrangements to training, if they're sharing dressing rooms or trying to get one squad into a dressing room, then they need to stop and they need to observe the social distancing guidelines that are in place. And if they don't, and the Premier League clubs will cop the brunt of this, but it can happen anywhere. If they don't, and if the government decide that there's too much flouting of the laws and the regulations going on, then they will stop football being played. And I think that will be a problem for everybody. So that, I would have thought, is the major problem facing National League at the moment, rather than a decision over whether to carry on or whether to stop. Because as I've said, I think that has got to come from the financial side, almost purely the financial side. Because if the government are giving you the money to be able to play, then you really need to play, don't you? You can't then say, well, actually, we're not going to play. We'll accept it on our terms. You have to accept it on their terms, really.
That's actually a very interesting point. And clearly there have been challenges with the funding that's come into the National League. And knowing you as I do, you would know David Bernstein like I do. He's been very critical, and has gone public with the report he was asked to produce by the National League over the allocation of fundings. You and I have had, I rant, don't I, on my calls with you, and I'm saying, Boreham Wood get 85 grand a month with an average crowd of 724. Notts County get only get £10,000 more per month with an average crowd of 7, 8, 9-fold bigger than Boreham Wood. Now, there was a mechanic agreed, fair enough, and it was paid out. Forget Notts County, because and I know 24 clubs will never agree on anything. There'll be 24 different views. But David Bernstein was very critical about the allocation. There's been talk, I've read, of the government looking into how these monies have been allocated. I mean, do you know any more on that? What's your take on that from the corridors of power?
Well, all I know, Paul, in fairness, is that there was an expectation when the funds were handed over as to how they were going to be distributed, but there was nothing set in stone for how it was going to be distributed. And it was distributed in a different way. Now, when I spoke to Mike Tattersall, he said there was a perfectly logical reason for that, but he didn't tell me what the logical reason was.
It's a miracle. You're the only person I know who's spoken to him.
Well, but that was the problem. And then when David Bernstein's report was sent back to the National League, there was an expectation that the National League would publish it. And then when I spoke to Mike Tattersall, he said, well, there's things in there that are impractical. Well, he didn't say what they were either. And that was the issue. So whilst, and I know the National League kind of published the report to an extent, they've not published the actual key bits of the report.
Yeah.
And until we get that, and I mean, you can have a reason, a reasonable stab at why it's not being published, but we don't know. And until that comes out, then I think there's going to be concern. And I think David Bernstein, I mean, this is football. And, you and I know that politics is everywhere in football. And that's been obviously evident over the last, the last 10 months. Every single level of the game, including the National League. So clubs with a vested interest of having the money distributed according to the number of fans they get in the ground will clearly want it to be one way, and clubs who, may not get the same amount of fans in the ground but may have other legitimate expenses in another direction, for example, youth development or whatever, they would expect that it would be hope that it would be distributed in another way. And it is a difficult job. This is the thing that I don't envy any of the administrators, because it's easy to sit there on the sidelines and say, well, this is ridiculous. And I could, I can almost imagine the people watching this podcast will on balance be sympathetic to a view that it should be distributed according to the number of supporters each club gets. But there are other factors at play, but without being opaque, without being clear about the reasons for the decision, then it all creates this uncertainty. And I think that is why David Bernstein came out as strongly as he did against the way that his review was handled, and why he described it as pointless, because it gave him no scope to do anything else. But then the last conversations I've had over National League funding are concerns that actually it's not going to be a grant that's going to be given for the second quarter of the season or second third of the season. It's going to be a loan. But I don't think almost universally any of the clubs would have agreed to start the season if they'd known that it depended on them taking another loan out.
Right. Now, this is a very good point. This is why we have you on, because, we go back a long way. You used to be chief football writer of Press Association, the national agency of this country. You moved over to the BBC. So you move around in the corridors of power of football decision-making chambers, because I wasn't, until you just said that, I wasn't fully aware of all this. So we know where we got up till Christmas with the grant and how that was divided out among the clubs. There's been conjecture as to whether that same formula would be used on an ongoing basis, January, February, March. Clearly, David Bernstein didn't think it should, and it should be reviewed and changed. You now appear to be intimating that this might not even be a grant anymore. This might be a loan. And clearly, there's going to have to be substantial discussions by National League and its member clubs, because a loan is massively different to a grant, particularly for clubs at this level.
I think there is concern at the clubs, certainly the clubs that I've spoken to, that they are going to be asked at some point to take a loan out. Now, whether that comes to pass, I don't know. But I mean, clearly the issue was, there was funding there in place to get the game until the end of December.
Yeah. And
we're now, what we're in, like 2 weeks into January, a week and a half into January. Well, you really need to know what you're budgeting for, don't you? Because you're running up costs every day. But that is basic budgeting of any business, isn't it?
So it certainly seems, irrespective of whether it's a grant or it's a loan at some point, do we know if the same formula is being applied in January, or has the league not agreed on it yet and communicated that to clubs?
Well, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? Well, I don't think anybody knows, do they? Yeah, I mean, Mike Tattel's gone now. We've got an interim chief executive in.
Appointed on a 3-month contract only. 3-month contract only.
Yeah. Yeah, Brian Barwick clearly remains as chairman. I think it's a very difficult situation, and I understand the reason why Mike Tattersall went. I understand that many people will think it's the best thing, but I'm not so sure in the situation the organisation is in terms of the season and the funding and the clubs having to play with no fans in the ground and no obvious end to that. I'm not sure it was the best move because, as I say, I think the issue over funding is one that should have been explained, but Mike Tattersall was part of the decision-making process. So
yeah, he was.
He should have done the explaining, but I also think he'd been in post so long. And as I say, I think it's easy to start throwing stones at people or start criticising people. He was part of a decision-making process. I assume there was a logical reason for it. It may be a reason that people don't like. It may be a reason that the majority of people don't like. But he was part of the decision-making process for that. And I don't believe he would have done that if he didn't truly believe it was in the best interests of everybody, which, that is to his credit. And I don't think it does the National League any good for the man with so much experience and so much knowledge of how the National League works to no longer be there. So that is a very difficult situation.
I wouldn't disagree with that, but equally, I think people have to be accountable for their actions.
Absolutely,
and you cannot, you cannot abdicate responsibility. And if you make decisions, and clearly, I'm thinking back now 12 months to the whole debacle about the season being null and voided and playoffs, not playoffs, this team goes up, that doesn't go up, file and all of those. It really was a complete dog's dinner. Yeah, and it was a very embarrassing U-turn. I think in the end they got to where they should have been. But I think it caused a lot of friction within the club structure itself. Yeah. Yeah. And I think he was on dodgy ground after that.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I'm not saying that the decisions were right or wrong. I'm not saying that the organisation has been run in the way that suits the clubs. What I am saying is we are in the middle of, we use this word all the time, an unprecedented situation. Not in my lifetime, not in your lifetime, and hopefully not in my children's lifetime, will any of us have had to deal with what we're dealing with now. So I've got, when you compare me to most people in this country, I've got it quite easy, really. I'm still working, I've carried on working.
Yeah.
Children, they're older, so I don't have homeschooling. One of them's at school, the other one was doing his GCSEs last year. Now he's doing A-levels, they're both at home. My wife's working from home. It's easy for us. But I am acutely aware that in virtually every house in this country, decisions are having to be made about situations that nobody's ever encountered before. And my view about Mike Tattersall is whether he's doing a good job or not, he was the person who was best placed to make the decisions that would allow the National League to function like in the best way it can. And I'm not certain, I don't believe that having a change at the top when there is so much uncertainty everywhere else is really the right way forward. That is my personal view. But, you are where you are, and other people have got to come in. But other people have got to come in and go through everything that Mike Tassel's already gone through. And I think that is the problem for the National League.
Yes. By that, if you took that decision making further down the line, what you're actually saying then is you wouldn't remove him at all, and you carry on making the same mistakes. You kind of...
No, I'm not saying that.
I think if you keep the same person in place and the clubs feel he is not the right person, action needs to be taken. I understand the point you're saying about timing, but let's move off individuals. We've got a few. We have like a live comment section. So Nathan Chambers has just dropped us a line. Well, don't worry, folks. Me and Stoney are always like this. We're always like this. We're always at it. Nathan Chambers says, postpone the season, health before wealth. Sam Cozy, or Cozy, my apologies for any mispronunciation. He'd like to see the season finish, but it seems massively unlikely. Health and safety of the players and staff has got to come first. Now, we've got an unusual scenario, and I don't know how unique this is within professional football, that one of our players has declined to train with the rest of the group for fear of COVID. Wes Thomas. And so he now has a personal training program before the players come in, and then trains after they've gone home. I don't know whether that is becoming more widespread or whether you've come across any other examples. But that, again, I suppose there tells you of the dangers the players are being put into. But equally, other people would say, what about first responders, people on the front line? But that's something else to throw into this equation, which is the flip side of the coin to the point you were making earlier about players like Chorley very understandably jumping on each other, and the need for professional footballers to show a little bit more restraint and compliance with social distancing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I if players are doing that, I was told of a situation, not at National League level, higher than National League level, where players are getting concerned and they are getting nervous about travelling to games and then subsequently finding out that people who've been on the same coach have tested positive, and what the impact of that is. And in general terms, players are not the kind of group that is going to be affected the most by this, but it only takes one, doesn't it? It only takes one, and then then we're having a different conversation. But players all have families, don't they? They all have parents or grandparents or aunties or uncles or children or wives who've got parents and grandparents. See, people don't operate in a bubble, do they? So I think all these things are a concern, and they're a concern that there's no reason why anybody should think a football player would be any different to me or you or anyone going out. And do you decide you're going to go to the shops? Do you decide whether you're going to go to the supermarket? You can go to the supermarket. You want to go to the supermarket. You can go into a petrol station. Do you want to go into a petrol station? Go to a post office. All these things, at a micro level, decisions that you have to take. And I would understand absolutely any football player who decided they didn't want to train with a squad because it's an exemption that's been given. Equally, I would understand any nurse who decided they didn't want to go into ICU because they were scared of getting something. Or working in a care home. I have the utmost sympathy and respect for anybody who's in a situation that they feel as though they may contract something that they don't want to get for obvious reasons.
Chris has sent a tweet in. His view is to carry on. He says he thinks the Premier League is struggling because the players will do stuff outside of the game when they shouldn't. clearly they're more likely to be caught, I think, perhaps is a translation.
Yeah.
Whereas lower tier players want to earn their money and therefore stick to what clubs tell them. Do you think there's a difference in mindset between players at this level and at an elite level in the way they're approaching COVID or not?
Well, I mean, clearly I don't know, but I struggle with the concept that Premier League footballers in general think differently to any other 25-year-old. I've seen instances of people flouting social distancing rules. Maybe they benefit from the fact that they don't have 2 million people looking at pictures of them on Instagram. And maybe if everybody did have 2 million people looking at them on Instagram, then the actions of a few Premier League footballers might not look quite as ridiculous as they do. But the fact is that these guys have got massive profiles and they know the attention they're under, they know the scrutiny they're under. But that doesn't mean to say that footballers in the National League are behaving any better. I have no evidence either way. I suspect nobody does. But I do know for with absolute certainty that 3 lads from Tottenham and a guy from West Ham far more newsworthy than, with due respect, 3 from Boreham Wood and 1 from Altrincham.
Very fair. Comments coming in thick and fast now, so we must be entertaining at least a few people live. Keldsdyke, I think we need to ride the next couple of months out and things hopefully will be getting better. Life needs to continue in some sort of normality as people's mental health is going to be a big issue. The importance of professional football, not just at Premier League level, Simon, but to all the communities in England. We have more professional clubs than anywhere else in the world per capita of population and geography. What about that?
I hear this all the time. I hear this from the Premier League say it's an important part of English or British life.
Do you not agree?
In general terms, if you put, well, Liverpool and Man United have just been drawn against each other in the FA Cup.
Yeah.
BBC have got first dibs at a game now. Far be it from me to second guess people who earn far more money than me and make far more substantial decisions than I do. But I would be surprised if Manchester United and Liverpool wasn't first pick on the BBC. The BBC gets the biggest viewing figures in this country. If you stick that game on a Friday night, which is the prime slot, you'd never be able to do that in kind of non-COVID times, but you might be able to get away with it. I don't have the fixture list in front of me, so it might not be possible. You put that game on a Friday or Saturday night, and you would probably get 8, 9, maybe 10 million people watching it. That might be a stretch, 10 million. That means within the UK, that's 55 million who are not watching it. So I think football is important, really important. I always have. But, I love football. I earn my living in football. I could probably go down the street and ask them whether football is important and quickly find a lot of people who say that they don't care. So I think there is an element of escapism about the fact that you can turn the TV on. I could go downstairs and turn the TV on now and there'd be Stockport and West Ham on. There's football on all the time, and it's a little bit of escapism for me. But
you watch it a lot on telly at home?
Yeah, I do. But that's my thing. My children watch a lot of YouTube, or my wife watches Netflix, and I think you could make the same call about whatever documentary you want. You could make the same call about David Attenborough, Planet Earth documentary. People want escapism. It just so happens that a lot of people a substantial minority of people enjoy football as an escapism. But the idea that the country needs it, I kind of struggle with that, really.
Yeah, folks, we're going to disagree again. You see, because I don't think it's just the 90 minutes that you watch. Okay, it's an appointment to view that you prepare for, you get ready for. Yeah, you look at all the preview stuff, and it becomes part of a week in the way that you have a weekend, which for many people Saturday and Sunday is off, and you become accustomed to it. Football becomes a pattern. You know, so if Notts County are playing on Saturday, you're counting down the days. You know, it's part of my DNA. It doesn't matter that Notts have been absolutely useless for the Lions part of the last 20 years. It's not about that. It's not about
the point, though, Macy. That is the point, though, that Notts are your club, and you know you earn your living, or you know that is, you know, football.
Wow, Notts County. I do have a professional sport, but
but football is your thing. But if your thing is going to the theatre or going to the opera, we can't do that, can you? You can do it on TV, maybe a little bit. I don't know. It's not my thing. I just think it's brilliant for me and for you, and presumably for the people that are interacting with you tonight and are across this. I think it's brilliant for them. What I'm saying is I don't necessarily think as a country it's giving the country an escape, because there are far more people who are not invested in it than there are who are invested in it.
Not sure I buy that one. But anyway, Neil Holmes, moving swiftly on. The worry is COVID is now so simple to catch. The strictest restrictions can make very little difference. If you're not going to null and void the season, then it has to be suspended till things improve. You're in the corridors of power at football at the minute. You're I don't know yet. You're head of the National League, Football League, whatever. Do you think now there needs to be a suspending? Do we or do we keep going on? What's a tipping point for you to change the current status quo of us still playing football?
Again, I think it depends where you are. I honestly feel that the higher up the ladder you go, the more there is a genuine concern about what happens if you don't honour TV deals.
Money.
I mean,
yeah.
But I mean, you can't. You know, if you're committed to contracts, then you have to honour those contracts. That is a fundamental principle of life, isn't it? And where am I? I'm living about 5 miles away from Old Trafford. Well, Manchester United, it's kind of held up as this money-making machine. Well, where does it make money from? It makes money from TV revenue. It makes money from fans going through the turnstiles. It makes money from people buying merchandise, and it makes money from sponsorship deals. Well, there's no fans in the ground. There are people buying merchandise, but not, I would imagine, in the same numbers. There are sponsors who are still willing to invest, but you can't offer them what you could offer them before, which is a place in the director's box maybe, or an executive suite, or an enhanced ticket, or whatever, trip to the training ground. So your only untouched almost revenue stream is a TV deal. So in order to protect that, you have to play football matches, because although they completed the season last year, they didn't complete it in a way that escaped them having to pay a big rebate in the millions of pounds to the broadcasters. So further down the line you go, I mean, Notts County, how are Notts County generating money? Well, how are they doing that? Well, if you take away actual football being played, well, probably the little money they do generate is going to be slashed even further, and you've still got to run a business. So I think the tipping point at the moment, I think it's in football's hands, because I don't get any sense that that the government are putting pressure on football to stop.
It's a very good point.
Secondary point is that it's a global game. The European Championships, and I've spoken to people at UEFA, the European Championships, I can't say will definitely go ahead, because what's definite? But at the moment, I cannot envisage a situation where they do not go ahead, because they've got bigger TV contracts than anybody. And those TV contracts, if you take out the big 5 countries, England, Spain, Italy, Germany, France, virtually every other country in Europe, and there are 55 of them, I think, are reliant on the handouts that they get from UEFA that come from the money that is distributed from the television contracts from the major tournaments. So if the Euros have got to start at the beginning of June, that means that domestic league, Premier League Championship has got to be finished by the end of May. So you have no time to stop their seasons. They're not under pressure to stop the seasons. So I can see an argument for it. League One, League Two, National League, I can see that. But as I said earlier on, my view would be that even if you can't play many games, if the government are not telling you to stop playing them, I would think you would be better playing them, because it's fewer games that have got to be played in the period where hopefully the situation looks far better than it does at the moment.
Okay, very good points. Kelds Dyke's come back. He's batting for me. He said he thinks you're slightly missing the point. It's not about one game. It's about following something. It's not just football. It's about all entertainment, sport. If you take away a focus, people will suffer. Okay, but we've done that one now. Here's one, controversial, from Northants Pie. We have them all over the place, you know. How about doing what Sean Dyche has mentioned? I presume he has. I've not heard him say it myself. Give the vaccine to professional footballers, then give the vast amount of money being spent by football clubs on testing towards the NHS funding for charities.
Wow.
Where'd you start with that one, eh?
Well, I mean, I can understand the rationale behind it. I just can't conceive of how that would be possible. I mean, what we're trying to do at the moment is protect the NHS. That is, you know, we hear it all the time, and that essentially is what the government, you know, that is what they're tasked with. So if you start vaccinating the group who, I mean, you know, 15 to 35 in general, that's football players, isn't it? 15 to 35 healthy male and female people. If you start vaccinating those people for whatever reason, and there are 70-year-olds not being vaccinated, I find that, if I was in the government, I think I'd probably find that a bit of a difficult decision to make. I can see the rationale, because if you extend it wider, there is an argument that if you vaccinate school children, you know, like you do with flu or mumps or whatever, then that stops the major spread, and that will cut down on the number of cases. I'm not entirely sure that cutting down on the number of cases is actually the absolute priority of the government. The absolute priority of the government is to cut down the number of people who have to go into hospital because they've contracted it. And that group has to be the first ones for the vaccine, surely. I would think, I just can't see how the government could reach any other conclusion, really.
Yeah, it's a very emotive one. Personally, I can never see it happening in this climate. Going back to kind of the logistics of completing a season, the argument as to ploughing on rather than null and void or suspension. Andrew Wraith has dropped us a line. He said, could everyone play each team only once? If already played twice, void the second result. That then means you don't have so many games to get in.
Well, an idea that was put to me, and this was by someone who worked in one of the leagues who are below National League level, but there's no reason why you couldn't put this in place for the National League, is that next season, for instance, and maybe it's something, we're learning all kinds of things now, aren't we? So maybe it's something that you could put in place every season, but you could effectively split the league into two, and instead of playing every team once, you play half the teams twice. And then in the other half of the season, you play the other half. And then if you'd got to the situation, what did you say Notts County had played?
We've played 14, I believe. We've got 30 to play.
Right. And you would have, in half a season, you would have 23, or you could have, instead of playing 23 games, so instead of playing everyone, you'd split it so there'd be 12 in each half. So you'd play 22 games. You'd only play the teams in your half. So at the moment, you would only have 8 matches to play to get to the end. Nobody's got to 22 games, but you could work towards getting to 22. And then, depending on when you got to 22, you could either activate the second half of the season and play the other 11 teams that you've not played, or 13 teams, whatever. It's 11. It would be 11 and 12, wouldn't it? It's 24. So you played 3 teams. So you'd be either in you've been 2 12s, wouldn't you? You've been 2 12. So anyway, 22 games. You then move over to the other half. If you've played those games in good time, you move over to the other half, and then you play everybody else twice. The other option is that you get to 22. So say with this, if it had been in place this season, you get to 22, but it's kind of like middle of April. Well, then you've got a winner of one half, a winner of the other, and maybe you could have, I don't know, four from each half.
Yeah.
And then they go into a kind of playoff situation. Then you could do, and that seems far more equitable than especially if you'd done it properly. So you might be able to do it on whatever format you wanted. So where everybody finished last year, and then it's first in, or like one of the teams who comes down from League Two in one half, the other one in the other half, and go down like that, I suppose, is a fair way of doing it. And then when you've got whatever the number is you're talking about, it could be 6, or it could be, I don't know, it could be 10, or it depends how much time you've got. But then you have playoffs at the top and the bottom, and then you know who's getting promoted. And that seems a far more equitable, even than points per game, which you can never be absolutely sure. Everybody expected that Barrow would have got promoted last year, but you couldn't be absolutely sure. There was a scenario, I think you pointed out to me, that Barrow still had to go to Harrogate. If Harrogate had won that game, and then Notts were playing Harrogate, and Notts had won that game, then suddenly, and then pressure's on. So you can't be absolutely certain that Barrow would have won the league, but clearly the league was a long way through, and it was justifiable to finish on points per game. But the league is not that, we're not that far into the league, so you couldn't have points per game now. You couldn't have that on based on 10 games or something.
You've brought into a very good point, and this is something that I've been trying to find out, and I think you gave me the answer, and I'm struggling with this one, because we knew we were starting this season later. We knew COVID was still around. And clearly one of the big bugbears last season was when we got towards the tail end of the season. There was then points per game with this formula, that formula, and all the rest of it. And there was a lot of talk, quite sensibly so, about saying you have to play a certain percentage of the season before you can then start to talk about how you settle the finishing positions. So, for instance, until you play 75% of games, it don't matter. It's null and void. So everybody knows before a ball is kicked that you've got to play. If you don't play, for the sake of argument, 34 games, right, mean average across the teams, then boom, that's it. Season null and void. And you agree wherever that is, 30 games, 25 games, or whatever. And it all went very, very quiet. Now, I thought, wrongly, as you will explain to me in a moment, that the Football League had come up and said it has to be this and that. And I thought the National League would just follow that or come up with it. But what you are saying to me, the clubs themselves with the league did not agree on an end, on how much has to be completed.
No.
Then begs the question, if you're Torquay and the season ain't finished, right? Again, it's the potential huge dog's dinner. Why did the clubs not come to agree something?
Well, because I think they're hard decisions. I think the problem is
it's worse not to make a decision.
But I think by kicking the can down the road, you're just leaving it more open to what we had last year, which is the clubs at the bottom don't want, they'll come up with any scenario. Clubs will come up with any scenario that suits them. So I think there was a general acceptance that you couldn't have points per game on less than 50% of matches, and that really you would need 66%, but that's not written down anywhere. And as I say, I don't know. I don't know how you would go about having that conversation now. And
exactly, well, you can't. It's a lot. Well, let's put it this way: it's a lot harder to have that conversation now,
absolutely,
than it was when everyone was on 0 points. Yeah. With 0 games played. Slough came out last week, didn't they? Saying how the season should be null and voided, blah, 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 blah. Oh, by the way, they're in the bottom 3. Last year, when they were pushing for the playoffs, they didn't want it suspending then. So we all know, and that's not blaming Slough, all clubs, you've been in it a long time, I've been at clubs. Clubs will look after their own individual interests.
Absolutely.
It is up to the league to lead the clubs as best as they can. And I think this is potentially a massive own goal, because if you're Torquay right now, right, you're desperate to get the season in. There's so many points clear. But what happens if we get half the season completed?
Yeah, I agree. The only thing that I would say is you're using Torquay as an example, but the experience of the last 10 months is that these decisions tend to be taken by the Premier League, and then everybody else falls into line.
Right.
I find that, ultimately, the Championship clubs will not want to do anything to put at risk the idea that 3 teams will get relegated from the Premier League and 3 teams will get promoted. They won't do anything. And equally, the National League, the people running the National League will not want to do anything that puts at risk the fact that 2 teams get relegated out of League 2. The problem you have is that if the National League, for instance, if the National League decides that unilaterally that the cut-off point is going to be 30 games, and you get to 2020, and the EFL has decided that their cut-off point is 25 games, well, you've not reached your cut-off point. So then what do? Do you rewrite the rules to suit yourself, or do you declare your season null and void when the EFL has reached its level? On the other hand, if the EFL's level is 30 games and the National League is 23, and the EFL get to 30 games and then finish on points per game, the teams at the bottom of the EFL, again, we're talking about politics, but whoever finishes at the bottom of the EFL, if they've got friends in high places, they're going to be asking how it's possible to be relegated into a league that didn't even reach the point that that their league reached, kind of 30 games. So where we ended up last year was that Leagues 1 and Leagues 2 were points per game, and the Championship played on. But that was, the gap was like the Championship and League 1 is two leagues in the same league. I think if you've got a gap between two leagues that are under different different boards and different organizations, then I think you've got a problem. You've got a problem when it comes to teams leaving a higher tier to go down to a lower tier in a different organization. So from the EFL to the National League. And I think that is the problem with the points per game, is that the Premier League have never come up with a set formula. And because the Premier League didn't do it, then the EFL didn't want to commit themselves to anything. Because the EFL didn't commit themselves to anything, I don't think the National League wanted to either.
From a logistical, practical point of view, you are absolutely right. But last season, when we started the season, we didn't know about this pandemic.
No.
This year we started while it was still raging. And so I think it's a complete abdication of responsibility by Premier League, Football League and the National League, because if you're asking my gut feel, I don't think there's any way the National League is going to complete all its fixtures. I just don't see it. I don't see it with COVID as it is, inclement weather, all the rest of it, money, as you've mentioned. And then we're going to have a big bun fight about whether the season stands, doesn't stand, depending how many have been played. And you're quite right. The Premier League, if they don't finish, will come up with a formula and so on and so on and so on. It will cascade now. But I just think, why was this not all agreed beforehand? Because, as you said, a can has been kicked down the road. I mean, one of the challenges, which we've had some questions on this tonight, is the whole issue of rearranged games. So at the minute, as I understand this, the National League will only allow you to rearrange games that have already been postponed. And I think, hang on a minute, that sounds a bit stupid. The point I'm making here is that so many clubs have got COVID, right? So we're without a game because the team we're supposed to play have got COVID, right? So our game's off. Another team that's supposed to be playing someone else, they've got COVID, right? So therefore, we could play each other. That happens every weekend, yeah? The National League will not allow you to do that. Clubs currently, so this infilling of fixtures is kind of not allowed. Not approached two teams to play them this weekend, yeah? Said they would travel, right, to get the fixtures in. Those other clubs didn't want to play. Now, if you're trying to get a season away, surely the league has to take direction, because you can arrange games at 3-4 days notice now. There's no logistics, no fans, etc. The away team's got to get a bus, the groundsman's got to cut the grass, you sort your training programme out, you turn up. It's no different to playing a practice game when clubs ring each other up. Could you come up to our place tomorrow, we need a game because we've got to sort out, we've got a few young players coming through, they need a match. But the National League aren't mandating that, and which is another reason why I don't see this as physically getting the games in. And so that causes frustration among certainly Notts' fan base and among other clubs' fan bases, that we all know it's really, really difficult, but when you can get some extra games in, take them, put them in, tell the clubs, no, why can you not play a week on Tuesday there, or why can't you play this blank Saturday? We'll move that forward. You're playing it. Leadership from the league.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. And I mean, I've had an experience of it today. I mean, the Premier League have arranged a game at 2 days' notice for a team that weren't supposed to be playing this week. So how do they feel about that? And then when you speak to the Premier League about that, they say, well, all the officials were told, all the executives were told at the start of the season, the difficult decisions were going to have to be made, and there would be some ones that didn't suit some and some that didn't suit others, and therefore, it's basically tough luck.
But that strikes me, Simon, as a league that is desperately trying to complete its fixtures in a finite period of time, because it knows it's got the European Championships and all the international. So they are doing everything they can, and there will be some unpopular rescheduling, but they're doing everything they can. Whereas the National League, we could have played each of the last week, and we've not played.
But
we're not going to play you.
But I don't. If you're, as we've said, the Premier League, as you've just said, the Premier League's got to be finished by the end of May. It's got to be finished. So they have, and if you look at the Premier League fixture list, they have no space. There is no room. So there is a kind of imperative on them to arrange these games. What I would go back to is something that I said, at the start of the chat. If you work on the basis, and I don't know whether this is what the National League executive, and I go back to the point about Mike Tattersall, and he at least would have understood the general makeup of the league and how its clubs think. And that's not to say there would have been a different decision. I just think it would have been easier to make the decision than, unfortunately, someone who's coming into league and organisation has got to get used to the organisation. And I'm not having a debate about whether the decision is right or wrong. I just think it's easier to make it. But if you work on the basis that you have got until the end of June, and that, that might be their thinking, I don't know. But if you think you've got 3 months, April, May, June, you've got 12 weeks, you've got some playoffs to get in there. So, 12 weeks, 10, 11 match midweeks, you can get half a season in that time. Maybe they think that we don't want to be arranging more games because that's more chance of something going wrong at the moment.
Right.
We don't want to limit. We want to limit the amount people are travelling, not increase it. So all we're going to do is stick with the fixtures list as it is. The games that can go ahead. The games that can't. And then when we get to the end of February, and then we've got to start looking further down the track at what's going to happen, then we can make a decision on how we complete the season. Because it may be that you get to the end of March and you think April's not going to be much better than March. We've still got 20 odd games to fill in. We can't do it. We have to scrap this. And actually then playing a game this midweek or this weekend or not is it doesn't alter the scheme of things. I think all you're doing, as I've said, is chopping a few off, but the bulk of the games that you play are going to be in April, May and June. But I don't know whether that's thought process, but I could see that's how you would arrive at that idea. Again, if that is the idea and you're the executive body responsible for implementing that will reach agreement with some clubs and not from others. But that fundamentally is the point of running a league. It's like being a referee. You don't expect to be liked. You get decisions right, people will dislike you a bit, and if you get them wrong, they'll dislike you a lot.
You should become PR director for the National League. They need one. Yeah, I mean, look, the alternative conspiracy theory could be they don't want many games played, sooner they can get it called off. And I think, as you started this off, I think there's probably a lot of running around at the National League at the minute with regards to this whole issue of funding, because I wasn't aware that there wasn't going to be, inverted commas, ring-fenced grants for the rest of the season. You're clearly saying that isn't the case. Not to say it won't be, but clearly I suspect that's probably what the National League exec are running around at the minute from a funding perspective, and where the next allocation's coming from.
Well, that's the imperative, isn't it? The imperative, the overriding imperative is, where is the finance coming from to allow these businesses to carry on operating? That has got to be the number one priority for every single club.
But a football league comprises clubs, and what you do is play football. Okay? And if either you say you were suspending the season, which clearly then isn't going to help you get money, and makes no difference to the professional clubs, because I'm not aware you can just cancel contracts. I think clubs would still have to pay them. Yeah. That's one of the big challenges, I think, in fairness to the National League, is you have the big clubs that are effectively professional football league standard run clubs, in the sense they're pillars of the community, Wrexham, Stockports, Notts Counties, those sorts of clubs. And then the National League has to look after the best interests of a Wealdstone. And I'm genuinely not being disrespectful, but the business model for Wealdstone is always going to be very different to Notts County, and I think in the football league, every club is professional. In the football league, every club is a professional setup, and there are minimum standards and criteria. I think the National League, it's so disparate, isn't it, in terms of National League North and South, with 150 people going to watch. How is that business model is completely unscalable to someone that gets 5,000 a week?
But ultimately, the National League would not have started without some promise of government funds, would it? It wouldn't have started. I mean,
you'd like to think so, yeah. Yeah,
you wouldn't have got agreement from a majority of clubs.
But the reality is, as a result of David Bernstein being upset with the way that his report has been handled, as I read a story, Oliver Dowden now has been asked to review it and how these monies have been allocated.
Yeah,
well, if you are reviewing something and looking at how someone has either spent or misspent it, that by definition must mean that drawbridge could be pulled up.
Well, until anyone gets the check in their hand, they can't be guaranteed they're going to get it. That's the same for everybody. But then equally, Notts probably thought they were going to get X amount, and they didn't, and you have to find the shortfall. But unless you have some kind of central pot,
yeah.
However, you may not distribute it in a way that meets agreement, but nobody's going to say, right, we won't accept that amount that you're giving us. We think we should get more than that, or well, we're getting a bit more than we thought. Nobody's going to say, oh no, keep it. You're all right. We can look after ourselves. I don't see any club in the National League doing that. So I would have thought that was the overriding concern at the moment, which is beyond even how many matches are being played. I think that's just the way that, certainly if I was operating the league, that would be my pressing concern. I've got a fixture list. We're carrying on with the fixtures. You know, if you can play, you can play. If you can't, you can't. In the meantime, I'll try and sort this funding issue out, because that is imperative. That is the way that I would look at it.
We could keep going, especially me and you. We won't, because I've already taken up your half an hour has become something like about an hour and 9 minutes. You've obviously got to sort all these FA Cup draws out. Simon, thank you very much indeed for your time. It's been very interesting, and certainly I found out more talking with you than, I'm sure the same for all Notts fans listening in, than we have of 6 months, of 18 months of having been in the National League, because there does appear to be a massive vacuum in the way that they publicise and communicate. So thank you for shedding quite a bit of light on things. Let's see where we go. Pop into Altrincham as and when you can. I know it's very close to you, isn't it, Altrincham? Very close to where you are.
I could walk here. I could walk there from where I am at the moment. A couple of miles, that's all.
We did manage to beat them. Hey, we did manage to beat them. I don't know when we're due to go up there, but sadly, like you, I'm not too sure we'll be able to go and watch too many matches. At least you can get out and about and see matches at the minute, I presume.
Yes, I am fortunate, but I don't take it for granted. Although it is cold sometimes, sitting outside for 5 hours.
Absolutely. And of course, we do have our local BBC now, don't we, that aren't able to travel. So our local BBC people aren't able to go to away games now. But look, thank you for your time. It's been great catching up. And we look forward. I look forward to you breaking a National League funding exclusive in the very near future. But just ring me first to give me the heads up.
Been great speaking to you, mate.